Hello, and welcome back to Boring History for Sleep, where we trade action for atmosphere and dive into the quieter corners of the past. Before we begin tonight's journey, take a moment to pull up your blanket, adjust your pillow, and let your breathing slow. This is your time to unwind. And while you're settling in, we'd love it if you'd subscribe to the channel. Feel free to leave a comment below and tell us where in the world you're listening from. We find it quietly wonderful that history connects us across time and distance. And if this video helps you drift off, or if you simply enjoy the calm company, consider sharing it with someone else who might need a little peace tonight. Now, let's step softly into another time. Tonight, we begin in the damp alleys and bustling markets of the medieval city. Not the romantic castles of fairy tales, but the everyday grit of crowded tenements, chamber pots, firewood smoke, and the clatter of wooden shoes on worn cobblestones. This is a world where life was harsh, health was fragile, and survival was a daily craft. In this 2-hour journey, we'll visit not only peasants and craftsmen, but also rebels, royals, jesters, and healers. We'll uncover old mysteries, whisper through cathedrals, and peek into both banquet halls and plague huts. And we begin, as always, not with glory, but with grime. Let's discover why you wouldn't last a day in a medieval city, and so much more. Why it sucked to be a medieval peasant in a city. Imagine yourself waking not to the soft chime of a digital alarm, but to the heavy knock of a wooden shutter against stone. The sun hasn't yet risen above the jagged rooftops of the city, but already, the lane outside your cramped room is alive with the sounds of stirring feet, creaking carts, and dogs barking in the distance. You live in a room barely wider than your outstretched arms, on the second floor of a crooked timber house that leans inward over the street like a scolding elder. The walls are patched with mud and straw. The floor, uneven and cold beneath your calloused feet, is never entirely dry. There is no privacy. Behind a hanging cloth sleeps your sister and her 2 children. Beneath your own blanket, stuffed with coarse wool and last year's fleas, your legs still itch from the lice. You share this space with others not because it's comfortable, but because it's survivable. Your day begins with work, and often ends there too. If you're lucky, you apprentice with a shoemaker or help at the bakery. If not, you take odd jobs, hauling barrels, fetching water, sweeping muck from the steps of a richer man's door. The pay is little. Sometimes it's a crust of bread. Sometimes just a pat on the back and a hope you'll come again tomorrow. The streets are never silent. Even now, as you open the crooked door, the noise swells. A horse's hooves ring sharply against cobblestones, and a woman is calling out about eggs for sale, though whether they're fresh is anyone's guess. The scent that hits you isn't pleasant. A mix of sour beer, damp wool, and worse. The privies are far and few between. Most simply toss the contents of their chamber pots into the alleyways. A casual gardaloo is the only warning before the splash. You learn to walk quickly and close to the walls. Your clothing is simple. A linen shirt, woolen tunic, hose patched at the knees, leather shoes stiff with wear. There are no closets. Your entire wardrobe is on your back. The city feels cramped because it is. Buildings crowd each other for space, jutting outward as they rise. The narrow alleys between them turn into wind tunnels in the winter and ovens in the summer. In these close quarters, illness spreads fast. One cough becomes 10. One fever becomes a funeral. Food is never certain. A meal might be a porridge of oats and onions, thick with salt and a trace of herbs. You eat quickly. Others are hungry too. Water is a gamble. Wells are communal and not always clean. The lucky boil their drink, or mix it with weak ale to kill the worst of what lingers in it. But time is short, and fuel is costly. The church bell tolls. It marks the hours. The rhythm of your life is not controlled by clocks, but by sound. The bell, the call of the baker, the shout of a constable clearing the path for a passing noble. At the market, you shuffle past stalls selling fish, meat, cloth, and trinkets. Everything smells. Everything haggles. You watch your coin closely, if you have any. Theft is common. Punishment is harsh. Stocks in the square are never empty for long. The night falls fast here. After sundown, the city becomes a different place. Torches flicker. Shadows grow long. Law fades. Drunks wander. Doors are bolted. You stay inside, not because you're tired, but because it is safer that way. You fall asleep to the creaking of beams, the rustle of mice, and the distant echo of a lute being plucked in a nearby tavern. The blanket is thin, but you are used to it. Tomorrow will look much the same. There is comfort in the routine, even when it is hard. This is your life in a medieval city. And while it may seem a world away, you lived it, if only for a moment. The rise and fall of Wat Tyler. As the day's market bustle quiets, and the last traces of wood smoke rise above the rooftops, your mind turns to stories passed around the hearth or whispered in alehouses. Tales not just of saints and kings, but of those who dared to rise from the mud and challenge the order of things. One such figure, rarely carved in stone yet etched into the fears of monarchs, was Wat Tyler, a man whose name still stirs unease, though his face has long been forgotten. To understand Wat Tyler is to first understand England in the late 14th century. The air was heavy, not just with the stench of crowded towns, but with tension. The Black Death had thinned the population, altering the balance between landowners and laborers. Fewer hands meant higher value, and the peasants began to realize this quiet power. But the lords, unwilling to relinquish control, sought to pin them down once more, through law, tax, and decree. The breaking point came in 1381 with a tax. A poll tax, simple in form but brutal in consequence. It required the same amount from each person, regardless of wealth. For families already counting their crumbs, it was too much. From the villages of Kent and Essex, murmurs turned to shouts. And among those shouts, Wat Tyler's voice rose loudest. Not much is known of his early life. He may have been a roof tiler by trade, hence the name Tyler, or perhaps he simply adopted it. Some said his grievance began when a tax collector insulted his daughter. Others claimed he had long harbored a sense of justice sharper than any nobleman's sword. What is clear is that he emerged as a leader when the peasants' revolt ignited. Not a riot, not a frenzy, but an organized, deliberate march toward the capital. Tens of thousands strong, armed with tools and purpose, they moved toward London. They demanded an end to serfdom, fair wages, the removal of corrupt officials. Simple things, yet dangerous ones. Wat Tyler was not a figure of rage, but of resolve. By all surviving accounts, he spoke clearly and commanded respect. When the rebels reached London, they did not pillage at random. They sought specific buildings. Legal records were burned. Jails were opened. Symbols of oppression erased. King Richard II, just a boy of 14, met with Tyler and the rebels at Smithfield. It was a strange scene, royalty face to face with rebellion. There, Wat Tyler made his demands. Freedom, equality under law, and pardon for all involved. And for a moment, the king agreed. But history rarely favors such moments. Accounts vary. Some say Tyler was too bold. Others say the king's men were waiting for a signal. Either way, as Tyler turned to leave the meeting, he was struck down. First by the mayor of London, then stabbed again by royal guards. His blood spilled not in battle, but in betrayal. The crowd stood silent. Furious, confused. But then, in a surprising display of poise, young King Richard rode forth and called to them. "You shall have no captain but me." And in that fragile instant of hesitation, the rebellion unraveled. The king promised mercy, and many went home. Few realized those promises would be broken days later, with arrests, executions, and restored control. Wat Tyler's body was dragged through the streets, his head displayed on a pike. A warning and a message: challenge the crown, and the crown will remember. Yet the legacy did not die with him. Though serfdom did not end overnight, the revolt shook the pillars of feudalism. Over time, the ideas that drove the march to London, freedom, fairness, dignity, gained traction in quieter ways. Wat Tyler remains a symbol, not of chaos, but of courage. A working man who believed the world could bend, if enough hands pushed at once. So as you settle deeper into your blanket and the warmth of your present, remember him. Not for how he died, but for how he stood. Calm, unshaken. A commoner who, if only for a few days, made the rulers of England tremble. The mystery of the dancing plague. Close your eyes now if you haven't already. Let your breath fall into rhythm. And imagine, just for a moment, that the cobbled street beneath you begins to thrum. Not with the hum of voices or the clatter of wheels, but with the soft, almost hypnotic beat of feet. Not one set. Dozens. Then hundreds. Dancing, twirling, stamping in the sweltering air of a medieval summer. Faces blank or twisted. Movements frenzied. Some are laughing. Some are crying. None are able to stop. This isn't fantasy. It's Strasbourg in the Holy Roman Empire, what is now France. The year is 1518, and the town is about to be swept into one of history's strangest and most haunting episodes, the dancing plague. It began, as strange things often do, quietly. One woman, Her name, if we trust the records, was Frau Trophia. One morning in July, she walked into the street and began to dance. There was no music, no festival, no celebration, just movement. Relentless, erratic, unceasing. She danced for hours, then for days. Within a week, more than 30 others had joined her. By the end of the month, the number had grown into the hundreds. They danced in the open air, in courtyards and alleyways, their feet bloodied, their muscles torn, some collapsing from exhaustion. A few never got back up, and no one knew why. The town council, in an effort that might seem absurd now, but was logical then, decided to encourage the dancers, hoping it might burn itself out. They hired musicians, cleared space in public halls. They believed this was a physical illness, something that needed to be worked through the body. It didn't help. The records, mostly clerical and cautious, described the fear that took hold. People danced until their hearts gave out. Others slipped into unconsciousness. Still, the rhythm continued. No cause was identified. No single answer has ever satisfied. Was it a form of mass hysteria? A psychogenic illness sparked by stress, fear, or grief? Strasbourg at the time had faced crop failures, famine, and plague. Perhaps the mind simply cracked under pressure, and the body followed. Others have suggested ergot poisoning, a mold that grows on damp rye and can cause hallucinations. Similar to LSD in chemical structure, it can twist perception and stir strange compulsions. But ergot also causes convulsions, not coordinated movements. It explains some things, but not everything. There were whispers, too, of religious fervor. Of Saint Vitus, the patron of dancers and epileptics, whose wrath could allegedly curse the disobedient. In a world where saints were as real as kings, such a fear could easily fuel the fire. But even this fails to capture the full strangeness. This was not an isolated event. Other dancing plagues are recorded in medieval chronicles, though none so large as Strasbourg's. In 1374, in Aachen and other towns along the Rhine, people danced in the streets in apparent agony. And even earlier, in the 11th century, monks wrote of groups of people moving in unison, unable to stop, as if possessed. No one today can say with certainty what happened. But the imagery lingers, cobblestone streets echoing with frantic steps, limbs flailing, eyes wide, sweat pouring, as if something unseen compelled them to move. The dancing eventually stopped, just as mysteriously as it began. The city fell quiet. Life resumed. But in the archives of history, the event remains, fragile and half-remembered. A reminder that the past, however structured and rigid it may seem, was sometimes swept by things beyond explanation. As you lie still, listening to the hum of your own breath, think of those who could not stop moving. Was it grief? Was it madness? Or was it simply another story that slipped through the cracks of time? Too strange for certainty, too human to ignore? Rest now. Let the feet grow still again. We move next from the inexplicable to the structured, the world of guilds and quiet power. Inside a guild hall, power and patronage. Social/elite/contrasting daily life. Let us step away now from the narrow lanes and soot-covered cottages, and toward the heavier oak doors of a grander building. One not marked by gold or royalty, but by order, by rules, ledgers, and old alliances. The Guildhall. In the medieval city, power did not only reside in castles or in the hands of kings. It lived in the ink of parchment, in the weight of wax seals, and in the nods exchanged between men of the same trade. The guild was not simply a workplace. It was a structure, a family, a shield. It told you who you were, what you were worth, and how far you might climb. Picture the interior of a medieval guild hall. The timbered walls rise high above a polished floor, flickering with torchlight. The ceiling arches like a church, but there is no altar here. Only a long wooden table, worn smooth by the arms of generations. Behind it, a row of chairs, one taller than the rest. This is where the masters sit. Guilds existed for nearly every profession: blacksmiths, weavers, bakers, masons, butchers, coopers, tanners, cobblers, and more. Each one with its own rules, traditions, and symbols. To the outsider, a guild might seem a club. To the insider, it was a way of life. To become a master of your craft took decades. You began as an apprentice, often at the age of 7 or 8, bound to a master craftsman. In exchange for room, board, and training, you served loyally, sweeping the floors, fetching tools, watching, listening, learning. It was strict, sometimes harsh, but it was also your only path forward. After several years, if your master approved, you became a journeyman. Now, you were paid, but not much. You could travel between towns, selling your labor, working for various masters. You carried a book of reference letters, each one vouching for your skill. And then one day, if fortune smiled and your hands proved steady, you created your masterpiece, a final product submitted to the guild's scrutiny. If approved, you were admitted as a master. You earned the right to open your own shop, take on apprentices, and sit at that long table in the hall. Inside the guild hall, matters were discussed that touched every corner of city life. Prices were set, standards upheld, disputes judged. It was not just about making shoes or weaving cloth. It was about regulating the entire structure around those tasks. Guilds also cared for their members in times of need. If a craftsman fell ill or died, the guild might support his widow or children. During festivals or funerals, members walked together in procession, robed, solemn, united. But the guild was also exclusive. It protected its own. Outsiders, especially foreigners or unlicensed tradesmen, found it hard, often impossible, to compete. And guilds wielded considerable political power. In many cities, they held seats on the town council. They backed mayors, swayed elections, and sometimes even determined laws. Some guild halls grew so wealthy, they rivaled palaces. Their walls displayed holy relics. Their treasuries held coins and charters centuries old. And their banquets, held on saint days or after elections, were affairs of great formality, filled with roasted meats, warm ale, and songs sung late into the night. But beneath all the ceremony was a structure that held cities together. Without guilds, trade could collapse. Standards could slip. Chaos could rise. And so, for all their rigid rules and sometimes stifling traditions, guilds were the glue of medieval urban life. As you drift gently between waking and sleep, imagine that you are seated at that table, a master of your craft, your name inked in the guild's roll, your vote carrying weight. Outside, the city hums with noise. But here, all is calm. All is ordered. Tomorrow, the tanners may clash with the clothiers. The price of barley may rise. A journeyman may break a rule. But tonight, the hall is still. The candles flicker low. The ledgers are closed. And so too, for now, are your eyes. Why it sucked to be an apprentice tanner. The smell reaches you before the work does. A thick, almost sour aroma, like spoiled milk left to ferment under a summer sun. It's not something you grow used to. You learn instead to live around it. To breathe shallowly. To wipe your hands often, though the smell clings to your skin, your hair, your clothing. Even sleep offers little escape. You are an apprentice tanner in a medieval city. And for the next several years, this is your life. Imagine rising before the sky has turned fully blue, already damp from the fog that seeps through every crack in your boarding loft. Your master's house is small, stern, and loud with footsteps as others rouse for the day. There is no time to dawdle, no room for comfort. A crust of yesterday's bread, dipped in weak ale, serves as breakfast, if there is bread at all. You make your way down to the tannery, often located on the edge of the city, away from polite company. Not because the work is secret, but because it's foul. The industry of leather is one of blood, brine, and rot. And you, barely a teenager, are its smallest cog. The hides arrive stiff, raw, sometimes still streaked with fur or speckled with dried blood. These are the skins of cattle, sheep, or goats, stripped at the slaughterhouse and delivered to your master's care. It is your job, as the apprentice, to begin the process of turning death into material. First, the hides must be soaked, placed in deep pits of water to loosen hair and tissue. You use a wooden paddle to stir them, careful not to fall in. The stench rises thick as soup. Next comes liming. The hides are transferred into a vat containing a mixture of water and lime. Chalky, caustic, strong enough to burn your skin if you aren't cautious. This step softens the hides and helps remove what hair remains. Then the most dreaded part, fleshing. You pull the dripping hide from the pit, drape it over a curved stone or beam, and scrape it clean with a dull knife. Bits of fat, muscle, and sinew slide off in clumps. The blade requires strength and patience. Mistakes can ruin the leather, or worse, injure your hands. All of this, before the actual tanning even begins. The process uses tannin, a chemical found in tree bark, especially oak. You've helped crush the bark into powder, mixed it into water, and watched as the hides soak in large, open vats for weeks, sometimes months. The liquid stains everything brown. The smell is not sharp like the earlier stages, but deep, earthy, wet, and ever-present. Through it all, you are learning. Watching the master judge the quality of grain. Hearing his muttered curses when a hide cracks or curls. observing how he grades leather for boots, belts, saddles, and gloves. You are not treated cruelly, necessarily, but you are invisible. Your blisters are your own. Your sore back goes unnoticed. You are paid only in lodging and food, and sometimes not enough of either. And yet, this is a privilege. Many would take your place if they could. To apprentice in a skilled craft is a pathway to stability. Someday, if you endure, you may become a journeyman, perhaps even a master. Open your own shop. Take your own apprentices. But for now, your hands are raw, your feet are soaked, and your lungs are full of bark dust. The day ends when the light fades or the work is done, whichever comes later. You drag yourself back through the city streets, still damp, still reeking. People avoid you, or wrinkle their noses as you pass. You do not blame them. You fall asleep on straw that rustles beneath your aching back, boots beside your bed, hands still faintly stained with tannin. Tomorrow, the cycle repeats. There is always another Hyde. Eleanor of Aquitaine, Queen of Two Kingdoms. Let us lift the veil now from soot-streaked trades and muddy alleys, and step instead into the world of courts, banners, and ink-draped chronicles. But do not expect a tale of ease and indulgence, because even in palaces, life was a careful game of survival. Our story tonight is of Eleanor of Aquitaine, a woman whose life spanned nearly a century of medieval Europe's most turbulent moments, and whose power left echoes in both history and myth. A duchess, a queen, twice over, and a mother of kings, Eleanor was a force carved not from gentleness, but from unyielding will. She was born around the year 1122 into the vast and wealthy Duchy of Aquitaine in what is now southwestern France. It was a cultured land, known for its troubadours, poetry, and elegant courts, a world apart from the grimmer kingdoms to the north. Her father, Duke William X, died while she was still a teenager, but not before naming her his heir, an unusual and powerful position for a woman. And so, Eleanor became Duchess of Aquitaine at a time when few women even owned property. Her lands stretched across fertile valleys, vineyards, and rivers. Her inheritance made her one of the most desirable brides in Europe, and soon after, she married Louis VII, King of France. But Eleanor was not content to simply be a queen. She accompanied Louis on the Second Crusade, riding with armor and purpose through harsh deserts to the Holy Land. The journey was a failure, militarily and maritally. Eleanor and Louis were unsuited for each other. He was pious and cautious. She was spirited and politically sharp. Their marriage was eventually annulled, on the grounds of consanguinity, though likely more due to incompatibility. Soon after, she wed again, this time to Henry Plantagenet, who would become Henry II of England. And just like that, Eleanor became queen once more, this time of a larger and more unruly realm. With this union, she ruled not just Aquitaine, but a swath of territories that stretched from Scotland to the Pyrenees. It was the foundation of what would become the Angevin Empire, a patchwork of lands held together by fragile treaties, marriages, and occasional force. But power, for Eleanor, came with price. Her marriage to Henry was passionate, but stormy. She bore him 8 children, including 2 future kings, Richard the Lionheart and John Lackland. She managed court affairs, patronized poets and architects, and cultivated the court of Poitiers, which became a beacon of culture. Yet her independence and influence also made her dangerous. When her sons rebelled against Henry, driven by resentment and rivalry, Eleanor was accused of supporting the revolt. For this, she was imprisoned quietly and without trial for over 15 years. She was released only after Henry's death. And even in her 60s and 70s, Eleanor continued to shape the politics of Europe. She arranged marriages, negotiated treaties, and traveled across mountains to bring her granddaughter to Spain. Her final years were spent at the Abbey of Fontevraud, where she was eventually buried. Today, her tomb lies beside Henry and Richard, an unusual honor, a sign of enduring legacy. In an age when women were often invisible in history, Eleanor carved a place with words, wealth, and strategic brilliance. She was not beloved by all. Chroniclers called her headstrong, meddling, even dangerous. But they wrote about her, and that in itself speaks volumes. So as you lie still now, warm in your own quiet corner of the world, imagine Eleanor seated by candlelight, reading letters from foreign courts, pondering maps, weighing alliances. She lived not a fairy tale life, but a calculated one. Not a queen in name alone, but in action. And even centuries later, her shadow lingers in every tale of courtly power. Secrets of the Black Death mass graves. Mystery/archaeology/culture deep dive. Now we turn our gaze toward the earth, quiet, layered, undisturbed for centuries. Beneath your feet, under the stone-paved streets and sun-dappled fields of Europe, sleep the forgotten millions. Victims of one of history's most devastating calamities, the Black Death. You know the outline, perhaps, the plague that swept through Europe in the 14th century, cutting down between 1/3 and 1/2 of the population in just a few short years. But tonight, we won't revisit the horror in vivid strokes. Instead, we will uncover it gently, as archaeologists do, trowel by trowel, layer by layer. Because buried beneath city squares, under modern buildings, behind old walls and quiet meadows, lie the mass graves of the plague. And they are slowly yielding their secrets. In London, during excavations for new construction near Charterhouse Square and Crossrail tunnels, teams unearthed rows of human remains, stacked carefully, not haphazardly. Men, women, children laid side by side. Some had coins in their pockets. Others wore simple rings. They were not buried with ceremony, but neither were they discarded. The arrangement spoke of urgency, of societies under strain, trying to bury the dead with dignity, even as bodies outnumbered coffins. DNA analysis confirmed what was long suspected. These were plague victims, their bones still carrying the genetic traces of Yersinia pestis, the bacterium responsible. Similar discoveries have emerged across Italy, Germany, France, and even Scandinavia. In Toulouse, layers of lime dust in old cemeteries hint at rushed burials, intended to suppress infection. In Venice, remains of plague walls, temporary quarantine barriers, still stand, barely noticed by modern tourists. But it is not only the bones that speak. Objects buried with the dead, a comb, a rosary, a child's shoe, reveal what archaeologists call the human imprint. These people were not statistics. They were living, breathing souls. Some were loved. Some were alone. All met the same fate in the same few terrible months. Curiously, some graves reveal order amidst panic. Bodies were not merely dumped. They were aligned, spaced, even shrouded. This hints at community resilience, even at the edge of collapse. The clergy, grave diggers, and even neighbors continued to care for the dead, despite the risks. Elsewhere, signs of fear are evident. In certain burial pits, layers of quicklime cover the dead, intended to mask odor or prevent disease, though it had no real effect on the plague's spread. In some churches, old records show entire families buried on the same day. Recent techniques, like stable isotope analysis and radiocarbon dating, have allowed researchers to learn even more. Some victims were malnourished long before the plague. Others, surprisingly, show signs of long lives cut short suddenly. This suggests that poverty alone was not the only factor. The disease was democratic in its reach, sparing neither merchant nor mason. And still, questions linger. Why did the Black Death strike with such precision, then fade? Why did some communities survive almost untouched, while others vanished entirely? What lessons have we still not drawn from these graves beneath our feet? For now, the work continues, quietly. At night, in university labs. In the careful cleaning of a femur. In the cataloging of tooth enamel. The past does not shout, it whispers through decay. As you rest, imagine the stillness of those long-buried cities. The silence that followed the bells. And the patient hands that now, centuries later, return to these graves, not to mourn, but to listen. Living like a medieval merchant. As we leave the graveyards and return to the sunlit corners of the medieval city, the air grows warmer, the fabrics finer, and the clink of coin more frequent. Here, among timber-framed houses with painted signs and well-tended shutters, you will find the merchant class, not quite noble, not quite common, but powerful in their own way. Imagine yourself waking in a merchant's house, a structure of 3 stories, with a shop at the base, storage above, and a sleeping loft on top. The floors creak under your steps, the morning sun slants through leaded glass windows, and your servants are already preparing the ledgers for today's business. Unlike the tradesmen or tanners you passed in earlier hours, your hands are clean, but your mind rarely rests. You trade not just goods, but risk. Cloth from Flanders, spices from the Levant, salted fish from the coast, wine from Bordeaux. Your livelihood depends on letters of credit, shipments across dangerous roads, and the shifting moods of guilds and tax collectors. You are part of a growing class, one that doesn't own land or wear crowns, but builds influence through networks, marriage, and favors. You might dine with a local alderman or loan coin to a minor noble. You keep accounts with foreign traders and know the exchange rate between silver and gold by heart. Your shop is busy. The shutters swing open with a practiced rhythm. Apprentices display bolts of cloth, rolls of parchment, and jars of imported oil. Clients haggle. Some pay in coin. Others promise to settle next month. You weigh every decision, every glance. You remember which customers are late payers, which priests are well-connected, which rumors might affect the price of wool. At midday, you may retreat to your study. It's a quiet room with shelves of parchment, a table for writing, and a seal engraved with your family's crest. There, you review contracts, draft letters, and track shipments by candlelight. Your home smells of ink, beeswax, and dried herbs. The furniture is sturdy, often carved. On feast days, you serve guests roasted meat, cheese from the countryside, and wine from a barrel stored in your cellar. Your table is set with pewter or even silver, if you are particularly wealthy. You wear fine but modest clothing, a tunic of rich wool, perhaps trimmed in fur for winter. Your wife may wear a linen coif and a kirtle dyed in muted shades of green or burgundy. The family status is always on quiet display, never gaudy, never coarse, but evident. Your children are taught not just reading and prayer, but arithmetic, trade languages, and the rules of good conduct. A merchant's son may one day travel to Bruges or Milan. A daughter may marry into a family of scribes or civic leaders. You are always building, not walls, but alliances. And yet, for all the trappings of success, life is never simple. A bad harvest can raise prices and stall trade. A flood can ruin goods stored in a cellar. A royal decree can alter tariffs overnight. Even pirates and bandits must be considered. One lost shipment can undo months of work. So each evening, you count your ledgers as carefully as a monk counts prayers. The house quiets. The shop closes. The shutters are drawn. And you exhale, grateful that this day was profitable, or at least survivable. This is the life of a merchant. Not as gritty as a smith's, nor as glittering as a noble's, but anchored in discipline, calculation, and ambition. It is a world of balance between status and security, generosity and gain. As you lie in the warmth of your own modern bed, imagine the rustle of parchment, the clink of coins, and the slow creak of a wooden chair beneath the weight of one more day's decisions. Why it sucked to be a gong farmer. Now let's return to the underside of the city, quite literally. For beneath the workshops, beneath the inns and merchant homes, below the cobbled lanes and timber-framed walls, lies a world rarely spoken of, but one that held every medieval city together. Tonight, you are a gong farmer, one of the most essential and most reviled occupations of the pre-modern world. You dig, haul, and empty what others leave behind. You do not wear fine wool or carry a guild badge. Your tools are simpler, a spade, a cart, and a pair of gloves, if you're lucky. Your day, or rather your night, begins after sundown. Gong farmers, named from the Old English word gang, meaning to go, work under cover of darkness. It is not for secrecy, but necessity. No one wants to see, let alone smell, what you remove from beneath their homes. Your task is straightforward. Enter the cesspits and latrine vaults beneath homes, inns, and public privies and remove the waste. Sometimes it's liquid. Often it's thick, congealed, layered. You dig it out with a long-handled shovel and heave it into large barrels. The work is slow, methodical, and utterly essential. Most cesspits were located beneath ground level or in backyards, lined with stone or wood, and sealed with a heavy slab. Over time, they filled. When they did, someone had to climb down, often you. The air inside the pit is close. Heavy. Warm. There are no fresh breezes, no comforting sounds. Just the dull splash of waste being disturbed, and the creak of leather straps holding your tools. Breathing is shallow. Many workers rub vinegar on their upper lips to dull the smell, or chew cloves, though it rarely helps. And there is danger too. The gases released, methane, hydrogen sulfide, can suffocate a man without warning. The ladders are slippery, the ground unstable. Rats are common, and insects thrive in the humid dark. You haul the barrels to your cart, pulled by hand or mule, and trundle it beyond the city walls to one of the designated dumping sites. There, the waste might be used to fertilize fields, mixed with straw and left to rot, or simply buried in distant trenches. Your pay is better than most laborers. And in some cities, the position is even officially sanctioned. But no one envies you. Children run from your smell. People cross the street to avoid your gaze. You are tolerated, not welcomed. Yet the irony is clear. Without you, the city would fall into filth and sickness. You prevent the overflow, the infections, the stench that could choke a street. You make the city livable. Still, the toll is immense. Your skin never feels clean. Your boots never dry. Your lungs ache in the cold months. Your social life is non-existent. Marriage, friendship, even conversation. These come harder when your very presence sends people wrinkling their noses. And when you finally sleep, exhausted, aching, you do so in a small hut, away from others, on straw that smells faintly of the world you spent the night beneath. This is your place in the great machinery of urban life. A quiet cog, turning beneath the surface, holding everything together by removing what no one else wants to see. So tonight, as you lie in your clean bed, warm and far from the foul odors of medieval life, spare a small, silent thanks to the forgotten workers of the waste. The ones who walked into the dark, so others could wake to something better. The Life and Death of Thomas Becket. Biography/event narrative. In the heart of medieval England's tangled relationship between church and crown, there stood a man whose life would become legend, and whose death would echo through cathedrals for centuries. His name was Thomas Becket, and tonight we walk quietly through his story, not in awe, not in judgment, but with gentle curiosity. For his journey from clerk to archbishop to martyr is as much about conviction as it is about conflict. Thomas was born around 1120, the son of a merchant. Not noble, not poor. He was educated well, first in London, then in Paris. He had a sharp mind and a talent for administration, and he quickly rose in rank, becoming chancellor to King Henry II. At this time, the English throne and the church were tangled in a careful dance of power. Kings needed priests to legitimize rule. The church needed kings to uphold order. But always a quiet tension hummed beneath the surface. Who held the final say, God's law or the king's? Becket, as chancellor, was loyal to the king. He collected taxes. He enforced policies. He entertained lavishly, hosted nobles, and even led troops. He and Henry were close, laughing, feasting, perhaps dreaming of reshaping England together. So when the position of Archbishop of Canterbury became vacant, Henry made a bold move. He appointed Becket, hoping his trusted friend would bring the church into alignment with the crown. But something unexpected happened. Thomas changed. He shed his fine robes for a plain cassock. He began to fast. He prayed long hours. He challenged the king's policies. He defended the church's right to try its own clergy in ecclesiastical courts. He no longer played the role of political ally. He became, instead, the church's shield. Their friendship turned to estrangement. Letters grew formal. Disagreements became public. Henry, frustrated and betrayed, pushed back with laws that clipped the church's autonomy. Becket refused. He fled to France for several years, exiled but undeterred. In 1170, a fragile reconciliation was reached. Becket returned to England. But the peace was thin and tensions remained. Then came the fateful words. In a fit of rage, Henry is said to have exclaimed, perhaps more to himself than to his court, "Will no one rid me of this turbulent priest?" For knights took him literally. They rode to Canterbury Cathedral, where Becket was attending vespers. Inside the great stone structure, beneath arched ceilings and flickering candlelight, they confronted him. He refused to flee. He would not resist. The blade struck as the choir sang. The cathedral fell silent. His blood stained the floor near the altar. The shock was immediate and profound. The church declared Becket a martyr within 3 years. Miracles were reported at his tomb. Pilgrims came from across Europe. Henry, racked by guilt or perhaps calculation, performed public penance, walking barefoot through Canterbury and submitting to flogging at Becket's tomb. The event left a permanent mark, not just on the cathedral walls, but on the balance of power in England. The church stood firm. The memory of Becket's death became a symbol of resistance against royal overreach. Today, you can still visit the site where he fell. The stone is worn, the light soft. The atmosphere is reverent but calm. The drama of politics has faded, but the quiet gravity remains. So as you drift now between thought and sleep, remember Thomas Becket, not just as a martyr or bishop, but as a man who chose principle over comfort. In a world where lines blurred and loyalties tangled, he stood still. And for that, the world would not forget him. Medieval sewer systems, what we've found. Now let us lower ourselves once again, not into myth or memory, but into the earth itself, where time holds its breath. Beneath the cobbled lanes and timbered homes of the medieval city lies a quiet, persistent infrastructure that historians and archaeologists are still working to fully understand. The medieval sewer system. Not all towns had them. Not all cities used them the same way. But where they did exist, These hidden networks were as vital to urban survival as the walls that guarded them. To begin, let us picture a street in York, or perhaps Paris, around the 13th or 14th century. The gutters run down either side of the street, shallow troughs cut from stone or lined with wooden planks. Rainwater, refuse, and chamber pot contents all flow downward. Gravity, not engineering, does most of the work. Some cities, like London, relied on open ditches called kennels, which collected household waste and rain runoff alike. These channels were occasionally cleaned by city orders, but more often, they were left to overflow. Rats, insects, and the occasional stray pig made themselves at home there. But underground? That's where it becomes more intriguing. In places like Winchester, Chester, and even parts of Canterbury, archaeologists have uncovered early attempts at covered sewers, stone-lined tunnels, often no more than a foot wide and 2 feet high, built beneath market squares or major roads. They followed the natural slope of the land, carrying waste away from densely populated areas and toward rivers or collection ponds on the outskirts. These were not sewers in the Roman sense, those grand aqueduct-fed marvels of concrete and marble. Medieval systems were improvised, piecemeal, and very much practical. Still, they reveal a society that understood the importance of waste removal, not only for comfort, but for survival. Excavations of these channels often uncover a curious array of objects. Broken spoons, children's toys, fragments of leather shoes, even religious tokens. Some fell in by accident, others were perhaps thrown away. Over time, these became sealed in layers of sediment, preserved in oxygen-poor conditions that slowed decay. In London's Cheapside area, a series of medieval cesspits revealed organic matter so well preserved that seeds, insect wings, and even bits of textile could be examined centuries later. From these findings, historians piece together not just diets and hygiene, but social habits and trade patterns. And sometimes darker stories emerge. In Bruges, drains beneath a former leper hospital contained human remains, carefully packed in layers with lime, possibly an attempt to contain infection during a deadly outbreak. In Norwich, a hidden tunnel led from a monastic kitchen to an outdoor cesspool, where monks had created a private, hidden drainage channel. These systems were never glamorous. They required maintenance, often performed by nightmen or lower-caste laborers, and they were always fragile. Heavy rains could flood streets with filth. Frozen winters could block channels and send waste spilling into basements. Still, the mere existence of these sewers speaks to a kind of quiet ingenuity. People in the Middle Ages, so often dismissed as ignorant or backwards, found ways to adapt. Their world was not clean, but it was not as chaotic as we sometimes imagine. So now, as you rest, picture that hidden network beneath the sleeping city. The slow trickle of water over worn stones. The echo of distant drops. The preserved traces of daily life, drifting silently through darkness. It's not beautiful, but it's real. A forgotten system, buried in shadow, that kept life above moving forward. The court of love, troubadours and nobles. Social/elite/contrasting daily life. Now let us rise once more from the hidden tunnels and step lightly into candlelit halls where lutes are strummed and poetry floats on the air. A place where words were currency and glances were weapons. Welcome to the court of love. It is the 12th century. We are in Aquitaine, or perhaps Provence, in the warm southern stretches of what is now France. The air is scented with rosemary and crushed lavender. The sun lingers long over the hills. And within the stone walls of a noble's hall, something unusual is happening. This is no war council. No merchant tallying his ledgers. Here, love itself is on trial, not crude passion, but refined, structured affection, measured by verse and vow. At the heart of it all are the troubadours, poet-musicians who traveled from court to court, singing of longing, of honor, of devotion. Their songs, written in the Occitan tongue, described not everyday affection, but an elevated, distant ideal. A pure love for a noble lady, often unreachable, often unreturned. It was a world shaped by the likes of Eleanor of Aquitaine and her daughter Marie of Champagne, both powerful women who fostered these courts and lent them legitimacy. Under their patronage, noble women gathered to judge love itself, to hear arguments, weigh sentiments, and pronounce rulings on the meaning and conduct of romance. This was not mere entertainment. The court of love operated like a real tribunal, complete with cases, petitions, and written verdicts. Could true love exist in marriage? Could it survive jealousy? Was it better to love boldly or in secret? These were not idle questions. but cultural inquiries debated with grace and fervor. Imagine yourself attending one of these gatherings. The hall is quiet. Sunlight pours through narrow windows. Cushioned benches line the room. A lady reads aloud a case. A knight, recently rejected by the object of his affection, claims his love was misunderstood. He has composed a sonnet, which he now performs, voice trembling. The judges, ladies of wit and rank, listen. They nod. They question. They debate. And then, softly, a ruling is given. His love was too possessive to be pure. He must now turn his heart to virtue instead. It might seem theatrical to us today, but these courts played a very real social function. They shaped codes of behavior. They reinforced ideas of chivalry, fidelity, and emotional restraint. For nobles, especially women, they offered rare cultural power, a space to define, influence, and assert values. And beyond the courtly walls, their ideas filtered outward. Knights and clerks began writing their own poetry. Themes of noble love appeared in literature, sermons, even politics. The language of longing became a fashion, echoing across Europe. But of course, these courts existed only in rarefied spaces. The peasants did not recite poetry beneath the moon. The tanner's wife was not praised for her wisdom in matters of romance. This was a luxury of the elite, performed as both ritual and identity. And over time, like all things, it faded. Politics grew more brutal. Empires rose and fell. The lute gave way to the ledger, the troubadour to the taxman. Yet something of their legacy endures. When we speak of romance today, of courtship and poetry and love letters, we borrow, quietly, unknowingly, from those Camelot rooms. So rest now, with those echoes in your ears. Imagine the soft pluck of strings, the rustle of silk gowns, the slow deliberation of noble women deciding whether the heart can truly err when it seeks with honesty. It is a quieter history, a gentler rebellion, but no less real. Why it sucked to be a town crier. The bell rings before the sun has risen. You step into the cold morning air, wrapped in layers of wool, your voice still thick with sleep. In your hand, the clapper swings gently. On your belt, a scroll, rolled, sealed, official. You clear your throat. Today, like every day, you are the town crier. You do not have a shop. You do not carry tools. Your trade is in voice, and your burden is words not your own. In a world where few can read, where parchment is precious and books rarer than gold, you are the link between law and listener. But your role, for all its ceremony, is often thankless. You begin your day walking from street to square, pausing at markets, wells, and crossroads, wherever ears might gather. You strike the bell 3 times and wait for the murmurs to hush. Then you begin to read. By order of the mayor. Sometimes it's a new tax, on grain, on ale, on imported wool. Sometimes it's a ban, on gatherings, on beggars, on foreign traders. Sometimes it's a proclamation, a royal birth, an execution, a festival. And sometimes it's nothing but bad news, an outbreak of plague, a fire, a failed harvest. And you, the crier, must deliver it all. With clarity, with authority, with no right of refusal. You may be laughed at, ignored, sworn at, pelted with old vegetables if the message stings too deeply. But you keep reading. You speak for the crown, the church, or the guild, not for yourself. And every word you speak is weighed by those who hear it. The job is not without danger. In times of unrest, criers are the face of power. When prices rise or new levies are announced, the anger falls on you first. You are watched by the city watchman, yet protected by no one. You are both necessary and disliked. And your voice, your most precious tool, is never quite your own. A sore throat can cost you work. A mispronunciation can cost you coin. You must read clearly, often loudly, even in wind and rain, even when your stomach is empty or your feet are blistered. At times, you are asked to announce executions, naming the condemned, detailing their crimes. You must walk the parade route, bell in hand, voice even and controlled. Behind you, the crowd stirs. Ahead, the scaffold waits. And yet, there is pride in what you do. You know every alley, every accent, every merchant's cart. People may not thank you, but they hear you. You are their clock, their bulletin, their ever-moving newspaper. Children mimic your cries in play. Elders rely on your reports to plan their week. At night, when your scroll is empty and your bell rests silent, you return home. Perhaps to a shared room, a straw mattress, a bowl of stew. Your voice is hoarse. Your hands ache from the cold. But the city is quieter now. It knows what it needs to know. And you were the one who carried the words. So as you lie warm and still in your own bed, imagine the echo of that bell. The words that once rang through morning fog and muddy streets. The figure who stood beneath a watchtower, voice raised not in opinion, but in duty. Not a herald of glory, but of news. Of the rhythm of city life. The Battle of Hastings through a foot soldier's eyes. Now let us turn to a field, not quiet, not peaceful, but loud with memory. The kind of place that feels wind-scoured, even when the day is still. A wide slope outside a small town in southern England, in the year 1066. The place is Senlac Hill, though history remembers it better as Hastings. You are not a king, not a nobleman, not even a knight. You are a foot soldier in the army of King Harold Godwinson. And today, you will fight in a battle that will shape English history for centuries. You have walked far to get here, perhaps from Yorkshire, where only weeks ago you helped defeat a Norse invasion at Stamford Bridge. There has been little rest. Your boots are worn. Your shoulder bears the weight of a round shield. Your legs are tired. And now, before you lies another enemy, fresh, well-armed, and from across the sea. The Normans, led by Duke William of Normandy, have landed with cavalry, archers, and siege supplies. They bring not just ambition, but a claim that William, cousin to the late King Edward, is the rightful heir to the English throne. But you do not ponder politics. You think only of the hill, of your place in the shield wall, and of the man to your left. The ground beneath your feet is uneven, still damp from the morning dew. You steady your stance. You grip your spear. The sun climbs higher. The battle begins. The Normans strike first, with arrows that arc overhead like birds in flight. Most fall short. Some find shields. A few strike flesh. Then come the cavalry, thundering uphill, only to meet a wall of English resistance. Shields locked. Spears angled forward. Yells muffled by iron helmets. You brace as they crash into the line. The sound is not glorious. It is bone against wood, iron on flesh, the ragged breath of men fighting not for fame, but for survival. You jab forward, retreat a step, brace again. Your arm begins to tremble not from fear, but from sheer exhaustion. The Normans withdraw, regroup, attack again. Hours pass like waves on a shore. The sun shifts. Bodies pile behind you. Still the line holds. But then confusion. Rumors ripple through the ranks. Was Harold struck? Is the line faltering? A gap appears, small but dangerous. The Normans exploit it. Arrows fly once more, this time with greater effect. A sharp pain tears through your leg. You fall. The line moves on without you. You lie still, watching sky and cloud, unable to rise. Later, as the field quiets, the Normans move among the dead. You do not speak. You do not move. You are just one among hundreds, nameless, faceless, left to history only in numbers. Above, Duke William is declared victor. The crown, once Harold's, will soon be his. Castles will rise. French words will filter into English tongues. Land will change hands. The aristocracy will be remade. But no one will write your name. Still, you were there. You stood in the shield wall. You held the line. You lived the moment that changed a kingdom, not as a legend, but as a man. And now, centuries later, the field remains quiet. A gentle slope in Sussex, covered in grass. Tourists come and go. A plaque marks the spot. Few know your name, but they walk where you fell. So as you rest now in stillness, imagine that field in the early light. The mist rolling low, the sound of armor shifting, and the quiet pride of those who held the line, long before history turned their story into silence. The truth behind medieval witch trials. Let us now step away from battlefields and banners and enter a quieter, darker corner of medieval life. A place where suspicion whispered louder than reason, and the unexplained became dangerous. Tonight, we explore the truth behind medieval witch trials. You might imagine fire, crowds, and curses. But the reality, especially in the early Middle Ages, was more subdued, more ambiguous, and at times more tragic. In the earliest centuries of medieval Europe, belief in magic was commonplace. People spoke of charms, healing herbs, protective amulets, and weather magic. These were not crimes, they were parts of everyday rural life. The church, for its part, was often more concerned with rooting out heresy and pagan practices than with individual folk healers. But this would change. By the 13th and 14th centuries, whispers of maleficium, harmful magic, began to spread more widely. The fear shifted from innocent spells to accusations of intentionally causing harm, spoiling milk, cursing livestock, or summoning storms. These concerns were often born in times of stress. Famine, plague, economic hardship, When crops failed or children fell ill, communities searched for someone to blame. And often, that someone was a woman on the margins of society. Not all trials were fiery spectacles. In many cases, the accused were older women, widows, or midwives. Some were healers, practitioners of herbal medicine, passed down through generations. Their knowledge, once valuable, became suspect in changing times. One of the earliest and most influential documents in shaping which lore was the Malleus Maleficarum, written in 1487. Technically after the High Medieval period, but its roots stretch earlier. It described witches as agents of the devil, detailing signs, methods, and means of interrogation. But such texts built upon older ideas, rumors already flickering through parishes and villages. Archaeological evidence offers a softer window into this period. In Scotland and Germany, excavated village homes reveal ritual marks scratched into door frames, protection against evil spirits. In England, concealed shoes have been found behind walls, thought to ward off witches. These were not items used by witches, but by ordinary people trying to defend themselves from imagined threats. Interestingly, many trials were local affairs. Town councils, not kings, issued judgments. Accusations could stem from a neighbor's grievance, a family feud, or a failed cure. The trials were often less about doctrine and more about power and fear. And not every accused was executed. In the earlier medieval centuries, punishment might involve penance, exile, or mild fines. It wasn't until the late Middle Ages and beyond that mass trials and burnings became more common. Still, the seeds were planted early. There are quieter stories, too. Women whose names survive in dusty parish records. A healer in Lincolnshire. A widow in Cologne. A shepherd's daughter in Brittany. Their charges vague. Their defenses ignored. Their lives altered or ended over murmurs. What is perhaps most haunting is how ordinary it all was. There was no thunderclap, no howling wind. Just a knock at the door. A summoning. A question. Did you curse the calf that died? Why does your bread rise when others fall flat? Why do you live alone? And beneath those questions of fear, of difference, of misfortune, of the unknowable. As you rest now, imagine the quiet of a small medieval cottage. A fire gently crackling. A woman stirring herbs in a clay pot. Outside, the wind picks up. A dog barks. And in the distance, someone is asking questions. Softly, not yet accusing, but looking for a name to blame. The truth behind medieval witch trials is not only about belief. It's about loneliness, vulnerability, and the fragile threads of trust in small, frightened communities. Inside a medieval university, let us now climb away from the fires of suspicion and enter a quieter chamber. One filled not with chants or accusations, but with ink, parchment, and thought. Tonight, we sit quietly among the scholars of a medieval university. It is the late 13th century. Perhaps we are in Paris or Oxford or Bologna. The streets outside hum with the ordinary life of a city. Bakers calling out, carts creaking over cobblestones, the bells of nearby churches tolling the hour. But within the walls of the university, the rhythm is different. Slower, more deliberate. You are a student here, not a child, but a young man, perhaps in your teens or early 20s. You have traveled far to reach this place. Your family has saved for years. You wear a simple woolen gown, belted at the waist. Your books, if you own any at all, are precious and rare. The university is not one building, but many. Lectures are held in church cloisters, rented halls, even open courtyards. There are no campus greens or dormitories as we know them. You may lodge in a private home, or with a group of other students in a shared room above a tavern. Your day begins early, often before dawn. You gather with others in a small stone room, candlelight flickering. The lecturer stands at a raised pulpit, reading aloud from a Latin text, perhaps Aristotle, Boethius, or Augustine. The words are recited slowly, carefully, each phrase followed by glosses, commentary, explanation, debate. There are no whiteboards, no diagrams. Your tools are a wax tablet, a quill, and your memory. You learn by listening, by repetition, by disputation. Formal debates where you must defend or oppose an argument using logic, scripture, and rhetoric. The subjects vary, depending on the faculty. Some study grammar, rhetoric, and logic, the trivium. Others move on to arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy, the quadrivium. A few specialize in law, medicine, or theology, the crown jewel of medieval education. It is rigorous, but not always solemn. Students can be rowdy. Fights break out between townspeople and students, or between rival faculties. In Paris, students once rioted after a tavern brawl, leading to an official interdict that shut down the university for 2 years. In Oxford, tension between scholars and locals grew so great that the king had to intervene. Still, the university endures. There is structure, though it evolves. Masters and scholars form guilds, not unlike the guilds of craftsmen. They regulate curriculum, fees, and discipline. Degrees are granted not with a ceremony alone, but after public examination, disputation in front of peers, where you must demonstrate not only knowledge, but composure. And if you pass, if you prove yourself, you may wear a longer gown. You may earn the right to teach, to interpret texts, to shape the next generation of scholars. It is a world of learning and status, of faith and philosophy, where questions are bound to doctrine, but inquiry still thrives. And always, the tension between orthodoxy and exploration hums just beneath the surface. What is truth? What is authority? Can reason live alongside revelation? As you drift now into rest, imagine the slow scratch of quill on parchment, the low murmur of Latin verses, the soft creak of a wooden bench beneath a young scholar lost in thought. The medieval university was not simply a place of lectures. It was a crucible of ideas, humble in space, but vast in ambition. And some of the thoughts born there still live on quietly in the foundations of modern learning. Why it sucked to be a miller. Now we return once more to the rhythm of daily toil. The grindstone turns, the wheel creaks, and the smell of damp grain thickens the air. You are a miller, and your life revolves around the endless hum of flour, dust, and obligation. The watermill, or windmill, depending on where you live, is not your property. It belongs to the Lord, or to the monastery, and you are merely the man who keeps it running. And yet, in the eyes of the village, you are more than just a laborer. You are the keeper of grain, and that makes you both essential and deeply mistrusted. At first glance, your life might seem easier than that of a field laborer. You work indoors, away from the rain and sun. You handle grain, not manure. But that is only the surface. Each morning, you rise before the sun to unlock the mill. The building is cold, damp, and filled with constant noise. The wheel outside groans as water turns it, or, in other regions, sails catch the wind. Inside, great wooden gears clack and churn, connected by long shafts and turning millstones that weigh several hundred pounds. Your first task is to check the stones. They must be balanced, their grooves sharp enough to grind, but not so sharp they turn the flour bitter. This means climbing into narrow spaces, feeling your way around moving parts, and maintaining the ancient mechanics with what few tools you own. Then the villagers arrive. One by one, they bring sacks of grain, barley, rye, wheat, sometimes carried on backs, sometimes by cart. They stand in line, tired from harvest, their eyes on your hands. They know what's coming, the toll. As the miller, you are permitted to keep a portion of every sack you grind. It's your pay, a legal share. But it's never enough to quiet the suspicion. They accuse you of taking too much, of weighing the sacks wrong, of switching flour, of adding ash to bulk it out. Even if you're honest, their doubt remains. And if you're not, the fines and beatings can be severe. You work through the day, turning lever and chute, feeding grain into the hopper, watching it trickle between the stones. The dust is thick, clinging to your face and hair, filling your nostrils until breathing feels like wading through flour. Your eyes water constantly. Your hands grow coarse from bags, pulleys, and splinters. At noon you eat alone, bread, a bit of cheese, a swallow of ale. You sit on a barrel, back against a cold wall. You never feel clean. Then come the breakdowns. If the wheel jams or a gear slips, the entire mechanism stops. You crawl into the frame to repair it, dodging blades and iron teeth. A misaligned stone can crack, explode, or even catch fire. It has happened. There are stories. And always there is the grumbling. The villagers mutter as they leave. They inspect their flour, weigh their sacks. A dispute may lead to formal complaint. You may be called before the steward or bailiff. And there's little you can say, your word against theirs. At night, when the wheel finally stills, you sweep the flour from the floor, from the stones, from your own skin. You sleep near the mill, partly for convenience, partly to prevent theft. The rats come after the grain. The dampness makes your joints ache. But you must rise again before dawn. You are the center of village sustenance, yet you are always one whisper away from being shunned. The miller is vital, but never quite trusted. Needed, but rarely embraced. So as you lie now, in a clean and quiet room, imagine the turning of that great wheel. The steady crush of stone. The weight of flour in the air. And the man who lived beneath it all, always grinding, always watched. The story of Joan of Arc. Now let us journey beyond the dusty flour mills and into the tangled heart of war, prophecy, and faith. The wind turns colder. The banners are frayed. And in the middle of it all stands a young woman in armor, Joan of Arc, a peasant girl who changed the course of kingdoms. Born in 1412 in the small village of Domremy in northeastern France, Joan's world was one of occupation and unrest. France was fractured by the 100 Years' War, with the English and their allies controlling much of the north. The rightful French heir, the Dauphin Charles, was weak and uncertain. Many believed France was lost. Joan was not from a noble family. Her father was a farmer. Her mother taught her prayers. She could not read or write. But from the age of 13, she claimed to hear voices, gentle, steady, divine. Saints, she said. Saint Michael, Saint Catherine, Saint Margaret. They told her that she would save France. At first, no one listened. But Joan was persistent. She traveled to the nearby town of Vaucouleurs, petitioning the local commander for an audience with the Dauphin. She was refused. She came back. Refused again. She came back. Finally, they let her pass. In 1429, at just 17, she stood before Charles in the city of Chinon. Legend tells us she recognized him even though he disguised himself among his courtiers. A sign, some said, of her divine insight. She spoke with clarity and conviction. She told him she would see him crowned king. And he believed her. She was given armor, a horse, and command over a contingent of troops. Not to fight, at first, but to inspire. To lift the siege of Orleans, a city long under English pressure. What followed became legend. Joan rode into battle carrying a banner, not a sword. Her presence stirred the troops, demoralized the enemy, and sparked a change. Orleans was liberated. More victories followed. And eventually, she led Charles to Reims, where he was crowned King Charles VII. But her triumph would not last. In 1430, she was captured by the Burgundians, allies of the English. She was sold to her enemies and put on trial, not for her military actions, but for heresy. Her crimes? Wearing men's clothing, claiming divine voices, acting beyond her station. The trial was long, biased, and deeply political. She was interrogated repeatedly, over 40 times. Despite her youth, her lack of formal education, and the pressure of her captors, she held firm. She wavered once, signing a confession, but soon retracted it. In May of 1431, she was condemned. Not as a soldier, but as a heretic. They dressed her in white, tied her to a stake in the marketplace of Rouen, and burned her. She was 19 years old, but history would not forget her. 25 years later, her case was reopened. Witnesses came forward. Scholars examined the trial. And in 1456, she was declared innocent. A martyr, a woman wronged. In 1920, the church canonized her. Saint Joan of Arc. And yet, beyond the titles, beyond the sainthood and statues, there remains the memory of a young girl, riding through mud and fear, daring to speak with conviction, in a world that did not know what to do with her. So now, as the night deepens and the world quiets, picture her. Not on the battlefield, but sitting alone in a stone cell. Listening not to voices, but to silence. And still believing. Joan's life was short. But her fire, however quietly we speak of it, still flickers in the corners of history. The lost art of illuminated manuscripts. Now let us enter a different kind of stillness, a world of parchment and pigment, of quiet devotion and delicate artistry. A place where time moved slowly, measured not in hours but in careful brushstrokes. Tonight, we visit the world of illuminated manuscripts, books so finely made, they seem to hold their own soft glow. It is sometime in the 12th century, and you are in the scriptorium of a Benedictine monastery. The room is narrow, long, and lit by narrow windows high in the stone wall. The sun filters through in pale strips. The air smells of beeswax, vellum, and ink. Your task, as a monk trained in the sacred craft of copying texts, is to reproduce not just words, but beauty. You are one of the last guardians of an art form that has no margin for haste. You begin with parchment, made from stretched and scraped animal skins, most often sheep or calf. Smooth, pale, and slightly translucent, it is a surface unlike any modern paper. Each sheet has been prepared by hand, and no two are exactly the same. The text is copied first. You work from a model, another manuscript placed nearby. Using a quill pen, trimmed to a sharp point, you dip carefully into iron gall ink and begin. Your Latin is steady. Your spacing precise. You write in columns, ruling faint guidelines with a stylus. There is no room for error. One blot, and a day's work may be lost. But what elevates this manuscript to something more is the illumination, the art. Gold leaf is applied using a sticky substance called glaire, made from egg whites. Once it dries, a sheet of beaten gold is laid gently over the page, then pressed with a burnishing tool. It catches the light even in the dim scriptorium, glowing softly like a halo. Then comes the color. Your pigments are ground by hand. Lapis lazuli for deep blues, made from crushed Afghan stone. Verdigris for green. Red from vermilion or crushed insects. Each color is mixed with a binder, egg, gum arabic, or honey, and applied with a tiny brush made of squirrel hair. You work on decorative initials, turning a single letter into a garden of vines and birds. Sometimes small scenes are included: Christ in a manger, a saint slaying a dragon, a scholar deep in study. These miniatures, as they are called, bring life to the page. They are not illustrations, they are acts of reverence. Some manuscripts, like the Book of Kells or the Luttrell Psalter, are so intricate they seem almost to breathe. Margins filled with strange beasts, monks riding snails, or peasants harvesting grain. Sometimes humorous, sometimes sacred, they reflect a world where the sacred and the mundane coexisted. And yet, for all their richness, illuminated manuscripts were not made for the masses. They were painstakingly created over months, sometimes years, and were often intended for monasteries, cathedrals, or royal patrons. They were locked away, revered, protected. Today, few remain in their original form. Time, moisture, fire, and war have destroyed many. But those that survive still hold their glow, a soft shimmer of a time when the written word was a sacred act. As you drift now towards sleep, imagine the scriptorium quiet, the pages rustling gently, the gold catching firelight. A monk bends over his work, steady hand guided not by fame or wealth, but by faith and discipline. In an age before printing presses, these pages were a gift to the future, a quiet testament to beauty, patience, and the deep human need to make meaning visible. Life at a baron's banquet. Tonight, we leave the cloistered scriptorium and step into a far grander hall, a space filled with torchlight, laughter, and richly spiced air. Here, in the manner of a powerful baron, we join a medieval banquet not as honored guests, but as quiet observers at the margins of the feast. The great hall is long and high, its beams dark with smoke. Rushes cover the stone floor, sometimes strewn with fragrant herbs like lavender or mint to mask the scents of people, animals, and old wood. Torches flicker in iron brackets, casting soft shadows that dance across the walls. A fireplace roars at one end, its flames licking up toward a blackened chimney. Above the hearth hangs a family crest. Below it, the lord of the manor reclines at a raised dais, surrounded by favored guests, loyal knights, and perhaps the local abbot or steward. The table is lined with linen, if the household is rich enough, and dotted with pewter plates, goblets, and heavy loaves of bread. Wine flows freely. So does ale, brewed in the kitchens below. But it is the food that draws the eye. This is not an everyday meal. It is a celebration, a wedding, a victory, a feast day. The first course might include pottage, thick with barley and vegetables, or trenchers of bread hollowed out and filled with savory stews. Dishes arrive carried by servants in procession. Roasted fowl, sometimes swan or peacock, their feathers reattached for display. Game pies filled with venison, hare, or boar. Spiced fruits, candied nuts, and near the center, a glazed boar's head, its mouth stuffed with herbs. Spices, rare and expensive, are used liberally here: cinnamon, cloves, saffron, pepper, marking this table as one of wealth and status. The dishes are not just sustenance, but performance. Music drifts through the room, perhaps from a harp or a group of minstrels hired for the evening. Their melodies wind between the chatter, the laughter, the occasional burst of applause as a new dish is revealed or a jester performs a comic rhyme. Yet beneath the noise, the meal follows strict rules. Guests are arranged by status. The closer you sit to the lord, the more esteemed you are. The dishes you are served vary, depending on your rank. Table manners are enforced, especially among the young squires and pages watching their elders. There are no forks, only knives, spoons, and fingers. Napkins are shared. Everyone eats from communal plates, dipping in turn. Hands are rinsed before and after with scented water, poured from pitchers into basins. And as always, the kitchens below buzz with heat and hurry. Cooks work by firelight, turning spits, ladling broth, slicing fruit. The air is thick with steam, meat smoke, and commands. Scullions scrub pots with sand and rushes, while boys dash up stairwells bearing platters. The evening stretches long. As the main courses give way to sweetmeats and spiced wine, the mood grows looser. Nobles trade tales of battle or courtly love. Songs are sung. Some doze where they sit. Others step outside for cool air. And when at last the final bell sounds and the guests drift away to their chambers, servants slip in to clear the remains, bones, crumbs, and half-drained cups. The fire burns low. The hall grows still. And you, resting now, might picture it all. The warmth of torchlight on carved beams, the scent of cloves and roasted apples, the low hum of contentment beneath the flicker of wealth. In the Baron's hall, the world was ordered, opulent, and carefully watched. But it was still a world built on labor, hierarchy, and display. A world where every bite was a statement. Why it sucked to be a candle maker. Now let us leave the echoing halls of noble feasts and return to a smaller, more pungent room. One without linen minstrels or peacocks, only fat, fire, and fumes. This is the workshop of a medieval candle maker, and for those who practiced the trade, the work was not romantic. It was rank, repetitive, and filled with risk. You might imagine candlelight as soft and golden, and it was, once it reached the hands of the wealthy. But before that came weeks of labor, performed by men and women whose skin and lungs bore the cost. To begin, the raw material, tallow, rendered animal fat, most often from sheep or cows. Sometimes, if the maker was lucky, beeswax, cleaner, sweeter smelling, but far more expensive. Reserved for churches, monasteries, and nobles, beeswax was a luxury. Tallow was the workhorse. Your day begins early. You walk to the slaughterhouse where you collect the leftovers, fat and offcuts, wrapped in cloth or carried in wooden buckets. The smell hits long before you arrive, sour, greasy, clinging to everything. At your workshop, a small, low-ceilinged room, you begin to render the fat. It is boiled down in iron pots over an open flame, slowly liquefying into thick, yellowish oil. The steam rising from the pot is sticky and foul, clinging to your hair and clothes. Windows, if there are any, remain open, though the stench never fully leaves. Once the tallow is prepared, the dipping begins. Candle wicks, thin strands of hemp or flax, are tied to wooden rods, then dipped repeatedly into the hot fat. Each dip adds a thin layer. The candles must dry a bit between each round, then be dipped again. And again, dozens of times. There is no rushing the process. If the fat cools too much, it thickens. Too hot, and the candle loses shape. You must keep the fire constant, the fat balanced, the rhythm smooth. In summer, the heat is unbearable. In winter, your hands crack from the cold and the rough lye soap used to clean them. Burns are common. So are blisters. And the smell never leaves. Even when you walk to the market to sell your wares, people wrinkle their noses. There goes the chandler, they say. Keep your breath short. Yet despite the odor, your product is in demand. Every home needs candles. Every church, monastery, and merchant's hall. But the best work, the cleanest, most uniform tapers, go to the wealthy. The rest, often lumpy and smoky, are sold to laborers, taverns, or used for outdoor work. Your work is physical, tiring, and uncelebrated. You're a part of the guild, perhaps, if you're lucky, and that brings some protection. But you will never dine at a lord's table. Your candles may light his banquet, but you will never sit beneath them. At night, after the last batch has cooled, you wash your hands with coarse lye and scrape fat from the floor. You sleep in a loft above the workshop, breathing in the same scent that seeped into the beams. So now, as your own room glows with clean electric light, remember the candle maker. Not the warm glow of a single flame, but the hands that shaped it, scalded, calloused, and quietly overlooked. The flicker of a medieval candle was more than ambience. It was hard-earned. The Siege of Acre, Crusade chaos. From smoky workshops we now return to the clash of iron and the cries of banners, to a time when faith and fury marched hand in hand across continents. The year is 1189, and we are standing before the towering walls of Acre, a coastal city in the Holy Land, surrounded by tents, dust, and despair. This is the Siege of Acre, one of the longest and most chaotic episodes of the Third Crusade. And you, like thousands of others, knights, foot soldiers, cooks, carpenters, and hangers-on, have traveled across land and sea to reclaim this city in the name of Christendom. But now that you are here, under the blazing Levantine sun, the glory feels far away. Acre is no ordinary town. It is a stronghold, surrounded by massive stone walls, defended fiercely by forces loyal to Saladin, the Muslim leader who had recently retaken Jerusalem. For nearly 2 years, Crusaders would lay siege to this city, and the cost would be staggering. You wake in a canvas tent, sweltering by mid-morning. Flies buzz everywhere. The smell of spoiled meat, unwashed bodies, and sickness hangs low. There is little water, less discipline. The nobles squabble constantly. Leaders like King Guy of Lusignan, Leopold of Austria, and later Richard the Lionheart of England and Philip Augustus of France all compete for command, supplies, and prestige. The ground around the city is a maze of ditches, wooden towers, siege engines, and makeshift camps. From behind the walls, defenders fire arrows and hurl stones. Every attempt to storm the gates ends in blood. Meanwhile, disease spreads. Dysentery, fever, starvation. 1 in 10, then 2 in 10 gone. Horses die. Weapons rust. Some soldiers desert, fleeing in the night. Others turn to prayer, or madness, or both. Morale swings wildly with each rumor. Saladin approaches. Reinforcements are coming. The city is near collapse. The city is stronger than ever. And yet you stay. You man the trenches. You haul stones. You bury the dead. Eventually, in July of 1191, after nearly 2 years, Acre falls. The gates open. Crusaders pour in. A victory, yes, but a hollow one. Thousands of prisoners are taken, held for ransom. Saladin delays. Tempers flare. And then a dark moment. Richard the Lionheart, frustrated and impatient, orders the execution of over 2,000 Muslim prisoners, marched outside the city and slaughtered. The air turns quiet again. Not with peace, but with weight. The siege was over, but the crusade was far from finished. Jerusalem remained out of reach. Philip returned to France. Richard would fight and then leave, captured on his journey home. The Holy Land, once again, would shift back and forth in the tug-of-war of empires and faiths. And you, if you survived, might carry the dust of Acre on your boots for the rest of your life. As you drift now into silence, picture the moon over a ruined wall. The faint clink of armor. The breath of wind through empty tents. The siege is remembered for its scale, its suffering, and its futility. A war of banners and prayers, but also of hunger, mud, and the weary waiting of those who only ever dreamed of going home. The mystery of the green children of Woolpit. From the clash of armies and sieges, we now drift into quieter terrain, past the ruins of keeps and into the hush of fields and hedgerows. Tonight, we find ourselves in a small English village in Suffolk, sometime in the 12th century, where something strange was said to have occurred. This is the story of the green children of Woolpit. The setting is pastoral. The village of Woolpit, named for its wool-filled pits once used to trap wolves, lies nestled amid farmland and gently rolling hills. It is a peaceful place, part of the manor of the Abbey of Berry Street, Edmonds. And then, according to 2 medieval chroniclers, William of Newburgh and Ralph of Coggeshall, something remarkable happens. Villagers, working in the fields near a wolf pit, discover 2 children, a boy and a girl, unlike any they have seen before. They speak no known language. Their clothes are made of unfamiliar material, and most strikingly, their skin is green. Pale green, like that of young shoots in spring. They are brought into the village and taken to the local lord's manor, where they are cared for. At first, they refuse to eat anything except raw beans, which they consume ravenously. Over time, they begin to adapt. Their skin gradually loses its green hue. The boy, already weak, dies soon after baptism. The girl, however, survives. She learns to speak English. And when asked where she came from, her answer is as mysterious as her arrival. She says she and her brother came from a place called St. Martin's Land, where everything is green. The people, the animals, the very air. She says it was always twilight there, never full daylight. She remembers tending her father's flocks when they heard a strange sound, like the ringing of a large bell. They followed it and found themselves in a tunnel. And when they emerged, they were here in Woolpit. What are we to make of this story? Even in its own time, it was treated as strange but not entirely unbelievable. Chroniclers recorded it without mockery, placing it alongside other marvels and signs. Modern scholars have debated the tale for centuries. Some say it was allegory, a parable of religious conversion, with the green skin symbolizing pagan origins. Others believe the children may have been Flemish refugees, orphaned and hiding in the woods during a period of civil unrest. Their unfamiliar clothing and language, when viewed through the eyes of isolated English peasants, may have seemed alien. As for their skin, it could have been a case of chlorosis, a form of anemia caused by poor nutrition, known in later periods as green sickness. Yet no explanation fully satisfies. There are no other records of similar children. The event, if it happened, left no material trace. And so it remains a story passed down through ink and parchment, whispered across centuries like a dream. A village, a pit, 2 children with green skin. As you settle now into stillness, imagine walking that path, beneath hedgerows, past the crumbling abbey walls, to the site where fields meet forest. The air is quiet, the trees sigh softly, and somewhere beneath the soil, perhaps, still lingers the memory of an encounter no one could quite explain. Not war, not plague, just a story, as soft and strange as mist. A day in the life of a knight's squire. Now, from legend and mystery, we return to the sturdy realm of daily service. Though not the peasant's toil this time, but that of the young squire, servant to a knight, and apprentice to the rigors of chivalry. It is dawn. The sun has yet to rise above the manor walls, and the frost still clings to the grass outside the stables. You are 14 years old, perhaps 15, and your lord's second son. You will not inherit land, but you might earn your place through service, courage, and time. Your day begins with discipline. You rise early, dress quickly, and attend to your knight's chamber. You lay out his tunic and hose, help him into his armor piece by piece. First the padded gambeson, then the chainmail, then the plates. You know each buckle by heart, each strap and fastening. The armor is heavy, and lifting it is part of your training. Once your knight is dressed, you attend him to breakfast, standing quietly behind his chair unless summoned. You eat your own meal later, in the servants' hall, a piece of bread, maybe some cheese, a bit of pottage if the cook is generous. Then the real work begins. As a squire, you are expected to maintain your knight's equipment. His horse must be groomed, coat brushed smooth, hooves cleaned, saddle oiled. His weapons are your responsibility. You sharpen his sword with a whetstone. You polish his helm until your fingers go numb. You repair straps and bindings by hand. But there is more than labor. You are learning. You practice with wooden swords in the yard. You ride each day, building strength in your legs and control in your seat. You are taught how to fall, how to roll, how to draw a blade and replace it without fumbling. Your training master is stern but fair. You are never praised loudly, but a nod means everything. You also study manners, how to serve at table, how to speak to lords and ladies, how to bow, how to wait. You must know how to carve meat properly, how to pour wine, and when to remain still. These rituals matter. In the eyes of the nobility, a squire must carry himself with grace as well as grit. In the afternoon, you might accompany your knight on a hunt, helping manage the hounds or carrying spare gear. Or you might ride with him to inspect the estate's lands, observing how power and responsibility play out across fields and villages. You learn through watching and through quiet imitation. At night, when the great hall fills with music and laughter, you remain just behind your knight's chair, ready to serve, to fetch, to retreat. You learn stories and songs not by singing them, but by hearing them 100 times. And when your knight is ready for bed, you assist him once more, laying out his night clothes, checking the fire, and setting out fresh water. Only then, hours after your day began, do you return to your own small cot in the barracks or servant's wing. You are tired but proud. You dream of the day you will be dubbed knight yourself. You dream of battles, of tournaments, of honor. But for now, your duty is to watch, carry, clean, and obey. So as you rest tonight, remember this path, the quiet steps that preceded every night's thunderous charge. The long, invisible hours of those who served, learned, and waited. To be a squire was not glorious, but it was the first rung on the long, hard climb to knighthood. Why it sucked to be a beggar during the plague. Let us now step away from the halls of noble service and into the shadows of history's most harrowing chapter. The year is 1349, and the plague has come. You are not a knight, nor even a peasant with land. You are one of the nameless many, a beggar, living on the margins of a city as it groans under the weight of pestilence. You sleep where you can, beneath overhangs, in alleyways, or curled in corners of abandoned buildings. The nights are cold, even in summer, and the streets are emptier than ever. Once you might have begged at church doors or in busy markets. But now people look away, not from scorn but from fear. Every cough is suspect. Every kindness is a risk. The Black Death, as it would later be called, moves without mercy. One day a neighbor carries water, the next their home is boarded shut. You see carts filled with corpses roll down the street. You see dogs sniffing at doors that no longer open. You smell the sharp, sour scent of lime and smoke, the city's feeble attempts to disinfect the air. As a beggar, your suffering predates the plague. You've long endured hunger, sores on your feet, and the burn of shame. But now, your very presence is seen as a danger. People avoid you not with pity, but with suspicion. You are a moving shadow of disease, someone to be driven off, not helped. Charity dwindles. The churches, once the final refuge of the poor, now ring only with the tolling of bells for the dead. Monks and priests are dying too. Some stay to care for the sick. Others flee. And you, without a home, a patron, or a guild, are left to wander between locked doors. You drink from fouled fountains. You eat scraps tossed from windows or root through abandoned homes, hoping the owners fled and not succumbed. Sometimes you find stale bread or dried beans or even a coin wedged beneath a chest. But often you find nothing, only dust, overturned furniture, and silence. The fear is constant. You watch your own skin, wondering if the dark swelling under your arm is a bruise or the beginning. And the laws do not protect you. In some towns, strangers are banned entirely. In others, the poor are rounded up, placed in camps, or expelled. You walk for miles only to be turned away at a city gate. No one wants you inside the walls, but there's nowhere beyond them either. And yet, through all of this, you continue. You find corners to sleep in. You barter for stale crusts. You learn which streets are less watched, which convents still hand out broth. You see things others never do, quiet acts of mercy and moments of wild cruelty. You become a witness to a city unraveling. And one morning, the sun rises again, just as it always has. Fewer bells ring. Fewer carts roll. The air is still heavy, but the worst seems to have passed. People begin to emerge. They look thinner, older, changed, and you remain. The beggar's life did not begin with the plague, and it will not end with it. But during those blackened months, to be poor was to be invisible, yet feared, present but untouchable. It was to endure not just hunger, but blame. As you rest now in warmth and safety, picture the empty city streets, the flutter of a beggar's cloak in the wind, and the quiet perseverance of someone who had nothing, but survived nonetheless. The betrayal of Richard II. From the forgotten alleys and the hush of plague-ridden streets, we now step into the cold, carpeted chambers of kingship, a world where power is absolute, until it is not. This is the tale of Richard II, a king born into privilege, raised in opulence, and undone by politics, pride, and betrayal. Richard became king in 1377, just a boy of 10, ascending the English throne after the death of his grandfather, Edward III. The court buzzed with anxious energy. A child king meant regents, and regents meant rivalries. Behind the scenes, nobles maneuvered for power, shielding and shaping the young monarch like sculptors working blindfolded. He grew up in the aftermath of war and rebellion. At just 14, Richard faced the peasants' revolt of 1381, a moment that could have ended his reign before it truly began. The rebels marched on London, burned palaces, and demanded justice. In a remarkable act of courage, or youthful foolishness, Richard rode out to meet them, declaring, "I am your king. I will be your leader." It worked for a time. The mob dispersed. But the memory lingered. Richard was bold, proud, and quick to assume divine authority. As he aged, Richard's rule grew increasingly autocratic. He surrounded himself with favorites, lavished wealth on art and ceremony, and embraced a theatrical version of kingship. He built great halls, wore robes sewn with golden thread, and insisted on elaborate rituals to emphasize his superiority. Not just as a monarch, but as God's chosen ruler. He believed in the divine right of kings, not as theory, but as fact. But his court became a place of suspicion. Critics were dismissed or punished. Nobles who had once supported him began to fear his temper, his retribution, and his disregard for traditional counsel. In 1387, a group known as the Lords Appellant confronted Richard and forced the execution of several of his closest allies. The king was humiliated, but not defeated. Over time, Richard rebuilt his authority. He traveled often, held lavish parliaments, and gradually restored his inner circle. But he never forgot the humiliation. And in 1397, he struck back, arresting and exiling many of the very nobles who had once challenged him. For a few brief years, Richard ruled as he had always dreamed, with unquestioned control. But the balance of power in England was never stable. In 1399, his cousin Henry Bolingbroke, the exiled Duke of Hereford, returned from abroad while Richard was away in Ireland. claiming only his right to his father's inheritance. Henry quickly gained support from discontented nobles and former allies of the executed lord's appellant. The people welcomed him. By the time Richard returned, the tide had turned. Castles were surrendered. His allies vanished. He was cornered in Wales and forced to abdicate. He did so calmly, but with bitterness. He handed over the crown to Henry, who became Henry IV, the first of the Lancastrian kings. And Richard, he was taken to Pontefract Castle, where he was kept under guard. In early 1400, he died there, quietly, mysteriously. Some say he starved himself. Others whisper of murder. His body was displayed in London to confirm his death. But his story didn't die with him. Richard II became, over time, a symbol of failed majesty, of divine pride brought low, of a king too obsessed with his image to see his own downfall. Shakespeare would later paint him as tragic and poetic, a man who mistook mirrors for truth. As you settle now into sleep, imagine the heavy silence of that castle cell, the flicker of candlelight on stone walls. A man once crowned in splendor, now alone with the echo of his own voice. Kings rise, kings fall, but the stillness of betrayal leaves a longer shadow than the crown itself. Hidden graffiti in medieval cathedrals. From the cold confinement of royal downfall, we now turn our gaze upward, towards spires, arches, and towering stained glass. But we're not here for the grandeur of medieval cathedrals. Tonight, we are looking beneath it all, into the margins, the hidden carvings, the forgotten scribbles that whisper of ordinary hands and fleeting thoughts etched into sacred stone. This is the secret world of medieval graffiti. You might imagine a great cathedral, York Minster, Salisbury, Ely, with its echoing nave, incense-thick air, and sunlight filtering through jewel-colored glass. These places feel permanent, grand, unchanging. And yet, on closer inspection, many are covered, quietly, subtly, with the marks of generations long past. Graffiti in cathedrals is not new. It dates back nearly 1,000 years. But only in recent decades have researchers begun to catalog these inscriptions in earnest. And what they've found is as fascinating as it is human. Some are names carved deeply in Latin, French, or English. Thomas was here, the rough translation of an otherwise forgotten monk or mason. Others are prayers scratched in desperate hope. Deliver me, Lord. Sometimes it's the symbol of a cross or a small image of a boat, perhaps left by a sailor before a long voyage. Many of the carvings date to the 14th and 15th centuries, times of plague, pilgrimage, and conflict. People entered these sacred spaces not only to worship, but to leave something of themselves behind, a mark of fear, of reverence, of memory. Some inscriptions are surprisingly artistic. There are labyrinths carved with careful precision, geometric patterns, or stylized faces with wide, staring eyes. There are merchant marks, symbols used for trade or signatures. Even small musical notations appear, scratched near choir stalls. Reminders of the sacred sound once sung by human voices now long gone. But not all graffiti is pious. In dark corners and behind wooden panels, conservators have found rude sketches. Crude images of animals, caricatures of monks or bishops, even the occasional indecent figure. These may have been the work of bored choir boys or irreverent pilgrims. Their presence reminds us that not all in sacred spaces felt reverent all the time. Perhaps the most intriguing are the protective marks, so-called witch marks or apotropaic symbols. These are shapes believed to ward off evil. Daisy wheels, overlapping V versus for Virgin of Virgins, or spirals scratched near doors and windows. Some were carved by clergy, others by visitors. All were meant to guard against things unseen. These hidden messages, once considered vandalism, are now seen as precious records, unofficial footnotes to grand histories. They remind us that cathedrals were not just places of ceremony and ritual. They were living spaces, open daily, bustling with people from all walks of life. The graffiti they left behind is a murmur beneath the liturgy, a soft chorus of hopes, jokes, sorrows, and secrets etched into stone. So now, as your eyes grow heavier, picture a quiet cathedral at dusk. The last of the sun streams through the rose window. A caretaker sweeps the floor. And somewhere, in the cool silence of the nave, a small carving waits to be seen again. A mark left centuries ago, not for glory, but for presence. A reminder that even in the holiest of places, ordinary hands left their trace. The court jester, fool or spy. As we remain within the echoing halls of the elite, let us turn now to a figure often dismissed as comic relief. A jingling hat, a painted face, a tumbling buffoon. But the role of the court jester was far more complex than mere laughter. In the soft flicker of candlelight and the tense silence of royal courts, the jester walked a dangerous line, mocking power, while living beneath its gaze. You may picture him there, beside the throne, slouched but watchful, a grin half-mask, half-shield. The jester wore motley, a patchwork of bright colors, his cap trailing bells that chimed softly as he moved. His staff, the bauble, was often carved with a miniature version of his own face. But do not mistake the outfit for foolishness. The jester was often among the most intelligent and quick-witted at court. His job was to entertain, yes, but also to observe. In a time when speaking truth to power could cost your life, the jester occupied a strange protected space. He could mock the king, ridicule nobles, and highlight court absurdities, all under the guise of jest. A good jester knew where the line was. A great jester knew when to cross it. Some jesters, like Will Somers, served for decades. Somers was jester to Henry VIII, and remarkably, he managed to outlive not only the king's many advisors, but also his 6 wives. He was trusted enough to joke with Henry when others dared not speak, and he reportedly lifted the king's spirits during his final, painful years. Others were foreign, or enslaved, or from humble backgrounds. Some were disabled, mocked for their difference, yet permitted in royal company. They were often outsiders, in every sense, and perhaps it was this that made their insight more piercing. The jester was not just a performer. He was a listener, moving through corridors, catching whispers, witnessing glances. In some cases, he was even used as a spy. Hidden in plain sight, he could repeat what he heard, always with a chuckle, always with plausible deniability. In courts rife with intrigue, jealousy, and ambition, laughter could be a weapon as much as a salve. But it was also a risk. If a joke cut too deep, or the court's mood turned grim, the very protection the jester relied upon could evaporate. Several were beaten, exiled, or worse. The line between amusement and offense was fine, and it shifted with the king's temper. Yet for all their danger, jesters offered something no court could do without: release. They were the pressure valve, the mirror, the human punctuation mark at the end of royal proclamations. They reminded kings and queens of their humanity, or at least the absurdity of forgetting it. As you drift now, imagine the quiet after a banquet, when the hall has emptied and the laughter has died down. The jester, still seated, watches the candles gutter low. The fool's cap is set aside. He scratches a note on parchment, or rehearses tomorrow's tale. He is not laughing, but he is listening, and somewhere deep in the castle his words still echo, half joke, half warning. Why it sucked to be a medieval midwife. As we near the final chapter of this quiet journey through the medieval world, we return to the flickering hearths and crowded alleys, not of castles, but of cottages and village homes. And here, in the stillest hours of the night, when laboring cries echo softly through timber walls, we meet the midwife. To be a midwife in the Middle Ages was to occupy a role that was essential, precarious, and often misunderstood. You were neither noble nor none. You lived among common folk, but your work brought you into the most private, fragile, and sacred of moments: the birth of a child. And it often sucked. Your day never ended. Births came at any hour, with no warning. A knock on the door. A child sent running through darkened streets. Come quick. She started. You grab your pouch, filled with linens, herbs, and charms, and hurry through the mud to a laboring woman's bedside. There is no clean birthing room. Just a straw mattress, a flickering candle, a sweating mother. The air is close. The screams, inevitable. You have no formal training. No books. No diagrams. Your knowledge comes from experience, years of observing, assisting, praying. You know how to recognize a breech birth, when the baby is coming feet first. You've memorized the herbs that might ease pain or stop bleeding: motherwort, pennyroyal, angelica. But when something goes wrong, and often it does, your options are few. Infections are common. So are complications. You have no access to surgery, no way to perform a cesarean, no sterile tools. When a mother dies, the sorrow is immediate, but the blame may follow close behind. The church, suspicious of women who knew too much about the body, sometimes viewed midwives with fear. Were you healing through knowledge, or by witchcraft? If a birth went well, you were praised quietly. If it went badly, you might be accused. Whispers spread quickly in small villages. Midwives were often called upon not just to deliver babies, but to baptize them in moments of emergency, especially if the priest could not arrive in time. The soul's passage was in your hands, along with the child's life. And when the child did not live, It was often your task to wash the tiny body, wrap it gently, and console the grieving family. You bore that weight too. Your hands smelled of blood, lavender, and wood smoke. Your dress was stained. Your sleep was short. But your work was vital. No feast, no war, no crown could begin without the first breath of a child you helped usher into the world. You were needed, but seldom honored. And so, as you settle now into the calm of your own breath and warmth, spare a moment for the midwife, who, with no instruments but her hands and knowledge, delivered futures into the world. Alone, uncertain, and always watching for the next knock at the door. The final tolling bell, death and dying in the Middle Ages. And now we arrive at the quietest corner of medieval life, one that all roads led to, regardless of rank, birth, or belief. In this final hour, we explore death in the Middle Ages, how it was seen, prepared for, feared, and ritualized. In a world without modern medicine, death was not distant. It lived beside people, on their streets, in their beds, at their tables. Plague and famine, childbirth and battle, infection and fire, all made life fragile. Most did not live beyond their 30s. Few families were untouched by loss. Yet medieval people were not strangers to death. They knew it intimately. It was not hidden in hospitals or behind curtains. It was part of the rhythm of life. When someone neared the end, there were rituals to follow. The priest was summoned to perform last rites, prayers, confession, and the anointing of the dying with holy oil. Family and neighbors gathered not to say goodbye with weeping and panic, but to prepare the soul for its journey. It was believed that dying well, ars moriendi, the art of dying, was vital. A peaceful death, with sin confessed and proper rites observed, was a passage to paradise. A sudden death, without warning or absolution, was feared more than pain itself. The home was made ready. The dying were often laid on clean straw, turned to face east. Candles were lit, holy water sprinkled, a crucifix placed in their hands. And once the breath ceased, the tolling bell began. One slow, measured ring after another. It was the sound of a soul leaving this world. In towns and villages, people paused at the sound. They crossed themselves. They whispered prayers. The body was washed, dressed, often in a simple shroud, and placed in a wooden coffin or carried on a bier. Rich or poor, the same earth waited. Funeral processions moved slowly, with mourners chanting or singing. In some places, professional mourners, women hired to wail, led the way. In others, it was a quiet walk, with only the rhythm of steps and bells. Burial was almost always on consecrated ground. A grave was dug by hand, and the body was laid to rest facing east, waiting for resurrection. The names of the dead were read aloud. Psalms were sung. Sometimes a penny or a sprig of herbs was buried with the deceased, small gestures of farewell. And after the burial, there were prayers. Meals shared, alms given in the name of the dead. Their soul was remembered in masses, sometimes years later. The living remained connected to the dead through ritual, prayer, and stone. The medieval world was full of death, yes, but it was also full of meaning. Graveyards were not places of fear, but of familiarity. The dead were part of the community, resting just beyond the church walls, their names etched in fading Latin, their stories carried in memory. And now, as you drift towards sleep, imagine the toll of that final bell, deep and low, echoing through fog. Picture a line of cloaked figures walking along a muddy path, lanterns bobbing, breath rising in the cold. They walk not in despair, but in ritual. Because in the Middle Ages, even in the face of the unknown, people tried to meet death with dignity, reverence, and grace. A reminder, as we end this journey through medieval life, that while the world then was harder and harsher, it was also deeply human. Echoes of a forgotten world. And so, gentle listener, we close the shutters on this long, quiet journey through the winding streets and echoing chambers of the medieval city. You have walked among peasants and nobles, rebels and kings. You've stepped over cobblestones slick with rain, stood at the elbow of a midwife, and watched candlelight flicker against cathedral walls etched with forgotten names. What remains? Perhaps it's not the grand battles or royal decrees, but the soft rhythm of daily life. The clatter of wooden shoes in the morning fog, the hiss of tallow in a flame, the whispered gossip in a market stall. The deep tolling of bells, the rustle of parchment, the murmur of a prayer said half from habit, half from hope. History is so often told in sharp lines and bold dates. But here, in this space, in this quiet, we've traced its softer shadows. We've found the people who carried buckets, sharpened swords, sang lullabies, and carved initials into stone. People not remembered in monuments, but in fragments. In the soot, the fabric, the echoes. As you lie still now, eyes closed or drifting, remember that the past is not a distant land. It's just beneath your feet, pressed into the soil and stone, waiting to be walked again. And you've walked it tonight, not in haste, but with care. Not to conquer, but to understand. So let the sounds of the present fade. Let the flicker of torches dim in your mind. Let the final tolling bell ring gently in the distance, and let sleep at last carry you. Until next time, rest well.